Ladies and gentlemen, take your seats. Our program is beginning now.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Dan Belcher. I'm joined by my colleague Vas Bala and David Hayes from PagerDuty. I hope you enjoyed the keynote. It was a good session. All right. At the keynote, we announced Google Stackdriver, and that's what this session is all about. It's about managing workloads across cloud providers. Since this was the first day that we announced Google Stackdriver, we have a lot of ground to cover. And so what we'll do is first, I'll provide an overview of the Stackdriver suite. We'll do a demo with a particular focus on the monitoring and logging components. There'll be a session this afternoon focused on the diagnostics components, and that's Stackdriver Trace, Stackdriver Debug, and Stackdriver Error Reporting, which we announced yesterday. Then I'll hand it off to David, who will talk about how Stackdriver and PagerDuty work together. And then finally, Vas will talk about Stackdriver in the broader context of Google Cloud Platform and how you can use tools like Bigquery and Cloud Data Lab to extend the value of your Stackdriver data. Okay, so for context, one of the things that we believe at Stackdriver is that visibility shouldn't be so painful. Right? We started this journey focused on monitoring in 2012, and at the time, we met with many customers who were running applications at scale in the cloud. And broadly, I could say that they fell into one of two categories. The first category, they'd say, well, we really don't have the visibility that we need into our application. We're relying on some basic capabilities from the cloud platform, but frequently we're surprised by performance issues or outages or capacity issues. Right? And so that was one category of customer. The second category of customer would say, actually, Dan, we're all set. We have great visibility into our systems. We have actually 2 teams that built and maintain monitoring and logging systems on our payroll, right? And those are teams actually that, they're doing that instead of helping to build our applications. Right? And so one thing that we believe at Google Stackdriver is that visibility shouldn't be so painful. Another thing that we believe is that we should be providing you with insights to do your job, right? Not just lots and lots of data, right? Because data actually isn't that hard to come by in monitoring and logging. There are many ways that you can get metrics, many ways to get traces, logs, lots of tools available for data visualization, log analysis, uptime monitoring, application performance management, right? There's a lot of signals that you can get related to performance. In fact, alerting is just another signal. How many people have gotten more than 10 alerts today for an application? 100 today for an application? Yeah, a few. And when we talk about providing insight, what we're really thinking about is that silos of data don't really help, right? And this is one actually that is important to us at Google, right? And it's really difficult to organize this type of data and make it useful for people who are operating applications at scale if the data is stuck in silos. So part of Google Stackdriver is about bringing that data together so that we can make it more useful. Finally, this may be a controversial thing to say at the Google Cloud Conference, but I'm going to say it. This isn't about Google Cloud. It's not about AWS. In fact, I'm also sort of in love with metrics and logs and alerts and that kind of thing, but it's not about metrics, it's not about logs, it's not about alerts. It's about you, right? It's about the people who are responsible for keeping applications fast and available and providing you with the tools that you need to do your job, right? And the sort of general theme that we're focused on with Google Stackdriver is making ops as easy as possible, right? And our definition of easy is, can it be really easy for you to find problems, right, wherever they're occurring in your application stack? Can we make it easy for you to fix those problems, get to root cause? Can we help you answer the very basic questions that you need to ask of your data, like, Do I have enough capacity? Are my users running into errors when they're using my application? Right? And can we do all that without creating a really complicated system that you need to integrate and manage and maintain? Okay. And so that's what Stackdriver is all about. At a high level, as we announced Google Stackdriver today, there are 5 components. 2, we did a brief demo on stage in the keynote, and we'll go deeper into those 2. That's monitoring. Think of that as alerts, metrics, logs, and so forth. Logging, which is exactly as it sounds, a really scalable logging pipeline that can accept system logs, application logs, request logs, and so forth, and make those searchable and available to you. And then 3 diagnostics tools. 1, debug, so you can debug issues with your code in production. Cloud trace, distributed tracing for App Engine applications, so you can compare latency, for example, between 2 releases. And then error reporting, a really exciting tool that we announced just yesterday that will automatically detect when there are a lot of one new type of error occurring in your application and notify you when that happens. So this is the Stackdriver suite. We'll go deeper into monitoring and logging here. Just for context, the way that we think about integrating is we think about your application stack, right? So integrating at the cloud platform layer, integrating at the system layer, integrating at the application layer, right? And collecting lots of signals, right? Whether that's logs or metrics or traces or errors. And then exposing features that make that data available to you. Okay, so we'll jump into the demo and show you how this all comes together. So this is the Stackdriver homepage. You may have noticed in the keynote, we started with a dark theme, then we jumped to a light theme. That's one of the advantages of the monitoring interface. You can choose whether to use a dark theme or a light theme. I'll give you a quick tour of the primary console. Here in the top left, you see uptime checks. So this is basically probes that you can configure to tell Google servers to connect to your internet accessible web endpoints periodically and confirm that they're up and available. Okay, so this can connect over HTTPS or HTTP or UDP. Think of it as a way of confirming that your end users can access your APIs and load balancers and front ends and so forth. Okay. Next, below that, we actually have a preview of a new feature that's related to our integration with PagerDuty. You can see that, thank God, David is on call right now in PagerDuty. Right? And if I wanted to expand that, you could see actually who's on call next and who's escalation and so forth. Below that, you see sort of at-a-glance health. So this is where we try to roll up these signals into a very simple way of knowing whether there are any issues. So here I have a few App Engine modules, and they're green, right? We know there aren't any alerts related to them. I don't have to worry about them. Likewise, there's a notion of groups in applications. So this is a really fundamental concept in Stackdriver where you describe how you think about your cloud environment. Okay, so you can define groups based on, for example, cloud accounts. So if you have GCP projects or AWS accounts, you could group those together in your Stackdriver application. If you have microservices, you could define groups for your microservices. Now, the important thing with these groups is you can define them based on, for example, naming conventions or tags. And here I could choose an AWS auto-scaling group, and I'd have a Stackdriver group that corresponds to that. Right? So as new instances are added to the group, those instances are brought together in Stackdriver. And that becomes really important when you want to have dashboards and alerting policies that represent sort of the architecture of your application and the way that you think. Okay, and we'll explore that in a little bit more detail in a moment. And then in the top right-hand corner of the Stackdriver homepage, you see incidents. So this is where you would see if you have any alerting policies that have triggered. Right? And we'll show you how to configure alerts in a moment. And then finally, on the homepage, you have your sort of at-a-glance view into the health of your environment in terms of key performance indicators. So here, the application that I have an elastic load balancer sending requests. That's being routed through an Nginx proxy, and then traffic's being balanced across clusters on GCP and AWS. Right? And so this might be the view that I want, the metrics that I want to be looking at every time I open the application, and this is very configurable. And then below, I see recent events or changes to my application. So this is where you can see that I have some alerts in the demo environment that triggered this morning. Here's also where I would see when people make changes, bring new instances online, and so forth. So that's sort of the overview of the Stackdriver homepage. Now I want to just give you a little bit of context in terms of how you get set up. First step in setting up Stackdriver would be to basically associate your GCP projects and AWS accounts to a Stackdriver environment. So here you see that I have 6 or 7 Google Cloud Platform projects. If I want to add a new project, all I have to do is click Add. I can select the projects that I want to add and click Add Projects. Connecting an AWS account, instead of being 1 step, is just 2 steps. So the first thing that you would do is create a cross-account identity and access management role inside of your Amazon console that grants Stackdriver access to query the Amazon APIs on your behalf. Okay? And once that identity and access management role has been created, then all you do is paste the Amazon resource name into this field and click Submit, and you'll be up and running. Okay? Now, when I say up and running, what that means is you'll have a bunch of dashboards and visibility by default, so you don't have to go and set anything else up. In about 2 minutes, you'll see, for example, an inventory of all your instances, whether they're running on Google or Amazon, in one list. And this list could contain, here I only have 116 instances. It could be 1,016 or 10,016. It doesn't really matter. And I could easily search and filter across those instances. So if I want to look at my Apache nodes, I can do that. Okay? That's one default view. Another one might be if I'm using, as I am in this case, Apache Web Server. So here, the Apache Web Server metrics are actually being collected by our monitoring agent. Our monitoring agent is a package of CollectD. CollectD is an open source monitoring daemon with a rich community, broad deployment. I bet many of you are already using it. And CollectD also has plugins to monitor things like Apache, Nginx, RabbitMQ, MongoDB, Elasticsearch, Cassandra, right? You can go down the list. And Stackdriver really thinks that these are sort of native services that many of our customers will want to use. And so what we've done is created dashboards that automatically show the relevant data from those services once you've deployed the monitoring agent. And you could go deeper from here. So I can look at, here I have Apache metrics. I could look at host level metrics, zoom into a particular time period, and so forth. You'll see a similar view on the cloud side. So for example, when I configured that AWS connection, I could see my Elastic Load Balancers on pre-configured dashboards that are very rich and designed to help support the workflows that you use when you have issues. So for example, here, these are all of my Elastic Load Balancers. Here I want to look at one. And when I drill to look at that Elastic Load Balancer, it's fronting a set of nodes. And so I can quickly gather key metrics for the ELB, like latency, like requests, like response codes, and so forth. But when I have an issue, for example, that users are getting errors, I may want to try to isolate that to an individual availability zone. So I could drill in and look at latency, requests, response codes by availability zone. Okay? So here I can see, for example, 400 errors in US West 2B. Right? And they're higher than the others in the cluster. Another case, I could actually go behind the load balancer and look at the individual hosts. So I could have a cluster of hundreds of machines, and this would give me a way to drill in and look at the capacity and utilization of the machines in the cluster. Okay? So that's sort of the native experience that you would get with a service like Elastic Load Balancer. And you'd see a very similar model whether you use on AWS, whether you're using ELB or RDS or DynamoDB or Kinesis, and you could go down the list of integrations that are available. All right, I guess it's about time that we talk about Google Cloud. So here you'll see, for example, a dashboard for PubSub. In this environment, I'm using PubSub. And again, out of the box, we get rich dashboards for PubSub, for App Engine, for Cloud SQL, right? And you could go down the list of GCP services where I would have a very similar experience. Okay? And so this is sort of how Stackdriver integrates at that cloud platform layer, at that system layer, and some of these application building blocks. Okay? But these are all pre-configured dashboards. I don't know about you, but I like to create my own dashboards and put them in the format that I want. And so here I can jump in to look at a dashboard that I've configured that sort of brings together these metrics, whether they're on AWS or GCP, whether they're at the system level or the open source sort of building blocks. And here I might want to actually look at a view that shows a little bit more data. And maybe I want to add more metrics. And a couple really important dimensions to this are we don't stop at that open source layer. We can go higher into the application stack. So you can send custom metrics that you define that might be the starting point for looking at the health of your environment, right? So in my case, I have a custom metric for job completion time. Now, this is strictly from my application. There isn't an agent that understands it natively, and that's available for me to chart, to create alerts on, and so forth. And so I can add it to my dashboard. Finally, we can also get visibility from our log data, right? So we have, we'll jump to the logs in a moment, but we can look at log metrics. So these are metrics that I define based on my log data. So for example, if I specifically wanted to look at 404 errors in my Apache logs, I could create a metric that has those flow into the system and bring that together with the other data. So here I'll save that metric. And so one of the great things that we talked about earlier is how this data all comes together, and we try to make it as insightful as possible. Here I'll preview a couple new features that you'll have access to soon. They're available in alpha. The first is giving you insight into kind of core statistics across all of my charts. So for example, if I go to the 3-column view, I can see at a glance what the maximum and minimum values are for a given time frame. I can also expand this to look at all of the legends, where I could, for example, chart the standard deviation across a large set of data, or the mean across a large set of data. So if you're managing hundreds or thousands of machines, sometimes you don't want to have a yarn ball of lines in your chart. You want to look at kind of key metrics across these large clusters. Okay. Secondly, in terms of providing insights, one of the things, again, that we're working on that I want to give you a preview of is the notion of vital signs. So as I talked about earlier, where we have all these different ways of checking to see if something's healthy, what our customers have been asking us for is kind of a scorecard view into the health of their applications. And so what vital signs is all about is when you describe how you think about your application using the group concept that we discussed before, we'll be able to present a standard set of sort of dimensions of health of your application and whether your application is actually healthy along those dimensions. We're really excited about this innovation and look forward to making it available soon. So that's most of the sort of monitoring side of the system, but when we talked earlier, we talked about how we want to support really rich workflows, right? And sometimes it's not just about the alerts and the metrics. When you find out at 3 o'clock in the morning from an alert that something goes wrong, a lot of times you want to dive into the logs. And so one of the things that we think about a lot is how do we support that troubleshooting workflow, right? So you might get an alert and see that you have a drop-off in your Nginx connections, and you're kind of zoomed into a view when you're looking at those connections. Well, what people, when we only had the monitoring interface, what people would do is they'd say, how do I double-click on that line and look at the logs? Right, and that's really what we're building toward. And so from here, with a click, I can click View Logs, and this will dive you straight into a filtered view of the Nginx logs for the specific resources in the chart for that specific period of time. Right? So you're not wading through reams of data trying to correlate manually across the different systems. So we think this is really cool. And as we mentioned in the keynote, it's really simple to go the other way. So I could search and filter on the logs, and then I could create a metric that feeds the data back into my dashboards, makes it available for alerting, and so forth. Okay. One other point here, we've talked a lot about alerting. Let's make sure you understand how alerting works. So from this interface, I could create an alerting policy by going to alerting. We can also do it from the charts. So again, if you're looking at that zoomed in interface for a specific metric, you can click Create Alerting Policy, and it'll take you directly to the configuration for that metric. Here, I'll do a little bit more of a sophisticated alert. So first, you could create basic alerts, right? Where, I don't know, if I want to look across my GCE instances in my Apache cluster on GCP, and notify me if any member of the cluster has CPU utilization above a certain level, right? This is a very low utilization cluster, as you can see. We could do that, right? But the Stackdriver system, because of this notion of alerts, you can use it to have more sophisticated alerts. So for example, on that cluster, if you're running many VMs, you don't really care often about a single machine having an issue, right? I certainly don't. What I care about is the aggregate across the cluster. So here, for that GCP cluster, what I might want to do is alert on whether CPU again, or let's say Apache requests, the total number of requests in the cluster fall below, to the cluster fall below a certain level, right? So here, I could say, it's a bad thing if they fall below 160, and then this alert would go off pretty quickly. So the alerting feature set is very powerful. You're able to sort of express alerting policies in a way that ideally keep us from waking you up at 3 o'clock in the morning when there's not an issue, but ensure that we do wake you up at 3 o'clock in the morning if there is an issue, right? And there are many ways that we can wake you up at 3 o'clock in the morning. The first one is email, right? Of course, I could generate lots of email. Many of you just told me you probably get a lot of emails on alerts. But we could do that too. You could also use Stackdriver to get SMS messages. I suspect you get SMS messages related to alerts pretty frequently. We can drop messages into Campfire or HipChat, or if you have a webhook, an internal application that we can post JSON to over a webhook, the application can do that. But perhaps one of our most powerful integrations and most widely used integrations is the one with PagerDuty. Right? And so to talk to us more about that, I'd like to welcome David to the stage.
Great. All right, thank you, Dan. Obviously, PagerDuty is super excited to be partnering with Google and Stackdriver, but I'm especially excited because I get to show you a lot of great new features with our integration. So our relationship with Stackdriver has extended back for many years, but today we're unveiling a bucket of great new functionality. But first, what is PagerDuty? What we solve is the many-to-many problem relationship between your monitoring tools and your people. So you manage a sophisticated infrastructure, and you monitor that with, hopefully, Stackdriver. It's a great tool. But you may also be using Splunk for log management. You may sometimes find out about things via tickets. You may be migrating off a legacy tool. You may have some custom tools that you've implemented for some edge cases that are unique to your business. And what we do is we roll those up into services. Because at the end of the day, or when something goes wrong, you don't care what tool got to it first. You care what service is broken. And then instead of mapping those services directly to people, we map them to the teams. So we're able to manage your schedule. So you know who's on call for a particular service. Maybe I'm on call now. You're on call next week. We have a third person who's on call the week after that. And then we escalate between those. So if I don't pick up my alert within, let's say, 10 minutes, it's going to escalate to somebody else, and then possibly do a third layer to make sure that it's resolved within the SLA. And then finally, the bit that Dan alluded to, we do wake you up at 3 a.m. That's not our goal in life. It's to help you fix problems as soon as possible, but we are very noisy. We'll phone you, we'll push messages to you, we'll SMS you, we'll email you. So what's exciting and what's new as of today is the Stackdriver and PagerDuty integration has 3 great new checkboxes. it's bidirectional. So whichever your single source of truth is, whatever screen you're looking at, whether it's Stackdriver or whether it's PagerDuty, you're going to see exactly the same information. So if your team uses Stackdriver, my team uses PagerDuty, we're going to be on the exact same page as to what's broken, what the state of the world is, and who's on it. We show the on-call schedules now in Stackdriver. Again, so at a glance, you're able to see who's responsible for fixing anything should it happen. And my favorite feature, we now embed live charts from Stackdriver in your PagerDuty alerts. So you'll be able to dive in the second we notify you and start resolving the issue. All right, let's see some of these things in action. As Dan pointed out earlier, we have the schedule displayed as a dashboard widget in Stackdriver. It basically just works. And I'm actually, if you don't mind, I'm going to go off script and I'm going to thank your design team because that is a beautiful looking widget. It really captures a concise view of understanding who's on call and when that's going to change. We also, Stackdriver has the concept of incidents, and obviously PagerDuty does as well. And now the two will stay in sync. So we have here Stackdriver incident, referring to something broken. And then in PagerDuty, we have the same incident. And as you can see, it links right back to the Stackdriver incident so that whatever your next steps in resolution, you're able to get there quickly and effectively. And like I said, my favorite feature, we show the live Stackdriver chart. So this is interactive. I can zoom in to find out exactly when and how something went wrong. You can tell just by looking at this that I'm faking my demo, that we basically took a process and we killed it, and we were alerting on it. But the big thing you get from this is as soon as you get your alert, you're able to tell what kind of situation you're dealing with before you've even logged in to any other tools, before you've jumped onto whatever your resolution path is, because the graph tells you an awful lot. So here's where we're going to do the technically sophisticated part of my presentation, and I'm going to gesticulate wildly because there's very different kinds of graphs. So if you've got a threshold set here, and it's broken by what we technically refer to as a chugga, chugga, chugga gradual thing, you've got a very different problem than if you've got a metric that's chugging along at 1 to 2% of the threshold and then shoots up dramatically. Similarly, it's up to the minute. So if you, let's say it takes those 10, those 15 minutes for you to get woken up and focus your eyes on your phone, you're now looking at this second's data as opposed to when the incident was triggered. So you might even be looking at the resolution, or the incident might have evolved. So perhaps it's crested above the threshold and it's trending down, which is a good sign. Or perhaps it went above the threshold and it plummeted to 0, which is a very bad sign, and you know you're going to be dealing with a very different kind of issue. And naturally, because we've been working with Stackdriver for so long, the configuration is super easy. You just drop in your authentication, or if you get to it before I have a chance to change it, you can drop in my authentication, and you've got a smooth handoff between Stackdriver and PagerDuty. And speaking of smooth handoffs, Dan?
Thank you very much, David. We've been really a great partner with PagerDuty now for several years. It's one of our most important integrations and widely used. If you want to learn more about PagerDuty, they have a spot in the partner zone, so you could go there to ask questions, learn more. Integrations, there are many in the Stackdriver service. Some of the newest and most exciting ones are with our big data services. And so what I'd like to do is ask Voss to demonstrate how you can use Google Stackdriver with the big data services in Google Cloud.
Thank you, Dan. We worked really hard to make sure that Stackdriver delivers an awesome experience right out of the box. Hopefully you saw that in the keynote and with Dan's demo today. And we're pretty confident that for 90% of the use cases our customers will have, Stackdriver is more than adequate. But what about the 10% of the use cases when Stackdriver isn't quite the answer to your question? You know, today, other vendors offer products where it's either their product or nothing. We've taken a very different position. We think Stackdriver is totally awesome. But if you would like to get directly at the underlying data, we're going to give you an ad hoc interface that lets you play directly with the data with Stackdriver out of the way. And I'm going to give you 2 demonstrations that show you how you can pull this off. The first is an integration with Bigquery. As you heard in the keynote, one of the things Bigquery is really awesome for is dealing with petabyte scale data with a simple SQL-like interface. Now, where do you see petabyte scale data where you need a SQL-like interface? Logs. So I'm going to show you in the first demonstration how, with just a mouse click or two, you can stream logs from Stackdriver to Bigquery and go into the Bigquery console, and you have a query playground at your fingertips. See that demo first. So what I'm showing you here is your logs view, and you can see these are actually logs coming from our Amazon project. So we are cross-platform. Now, let's say that the particular way that we allow you to query logs is not quite what you want. You'll notice here there's an exports button. So when you click on exports, it takes you this view where you can pick the service you want. So I'm picking my Amazon EC2 service. And if you already have a Bigquery instance set up, you can select it over here, or you can create a new one. And right here from this menu, and Stackdriver will take care of all of the creation for you. So there's no configuration of Bigquery or any such thing. Essentially, 2 mouse clicks, select, you've got a Bigquery instance. And now what happens is really cool. Stackdriver will now automatically stream your log data into Bigquery. You don't need to do anything else. You can just go straight to the Bigquery query editor. And here I have a query for which I'm going to look at my Apache Access logs. And if you're not familiar with the Bigquery query interface, it's pretty cool. You can see your query, the table schema, details, preview, and you can just edit your custom query here and just run the query. In this particular case, I've picked a canned query where I want to count the number of HTTP 200 and 404 errors. The Stackdriver logs viewer is very good at searching for keywords in the logs, but it's not set up to count the number of HTTP 200 and 404 errors. So just to show you an example, I've taken this case. And the query is pretty long here, and I'm also going to group the results by service and by region. So let's run that query. And here are the answers, right? It's grouped it by region, shows you how many 200 and 404 errors I get. So here's a very simple demonstration of the power of running on Stackdriver on the Google Cloud Platform. This is cross-platform. We took all the logs that are already in Stackdriver and we piped it into Bigquery and give you an ad hoc query interface to play with. All right. So on to the second demonstration. What about your time series metric data? That's another valuable source of data that Stackdriver provides, I think, a super cool, awesome interface for. But maybe there are situations when you want to slice and dice the data and visualize it in a way that is not available on the Stackdriver dashboard. And perhaps you want to run some third-party tools or open source tools on the time series metric data. How would you do that? Well, welcome to Data Lab. It was briefly mentioned at the keynote along with the Bigquery presentation. So let me just remind you. Google Cloud Data Lab was a product we announced last year. It's in beta. And it is based on Jupyter, formerly called IPython. And it is baked into the Google Cloud Platform. So you could start up a Data Lab instance on any GCP project, and it gives you an interactive Python environment to work with. And you can just directly program away in Python. And as you saw in the keynote, Data Lab already supports large data services on GCP, such as Bigquery, Cloud SQL, et cetera. And what we're going to show you now is we've also added support to tap into your time series metric data inside Stackdriver. And I think it's super cool. Let's take a look at that. So here we go. What you're looking at here is a Data Lab instance, and I'm pointing to this demo project on which Dan showed all of his graphs earlier. And this is an IPython notebook. So everything you're seeing here consists of Python cells that are all executable. And when you execute a Python cell, its results are shown immediately beneath it. And it's completely interactive, as I'm going to show you in just a second. But the other really neat thing about a notebook is you can treat it like a doc, like a document. And this notebook can be shared among other developers within your team. So it's awesome for running what-if experiments with data. Hey, here's a query I ran on the time series metric. Look at what it found, and just share it with your other developers. It's super awesome for those kinds of tasks. So let's first go through a few canned examples I've got in here just to explain how this works and get a feel for it. So what this shows is at the very top here, I've got my import. So from Stackdriver import monitoring as GCM. So this variable GCM, that object GCM contains all of the utilities that we've built into Data Lab. What's happening here is I'm running a query. This is just querying the time series metric data inside Stackdriver for a metric called CPU utilization over the last 2 hours. And I am restricting the result set to only be the data for instances that have a prefix called frontend. And in addition, the .align says I want to downsample the data by 5 minutes using mean as my aggregation function. And the results go into this Python object called Q1. Now, in that Python object, we've already built in a few utilities like line chart, right? And this is just a fully interactive line chart, just like you saw with Stackdriver. We built yet another utility called heat map. Again, the same data rendered in a different way. Sometimes heat maps are really useful in understanding aggregate effects, especially when you have very large clusters. Line charts tend to get very, very crowded, but heat maps are just the perfect thing. Discrepancies will just pop out at you. This is a tiny project, so you're not seeing as many instances on the y-axis here. But this is not about built-in utilities that Google provides. It's about giving you access to the raw data. And this is where the fun really begins. With the same object Q1, you can get the data as a pandas data frame. Again, if you recall from the keynote, Google Cloud Data Lab has built-in support for pandas. Pandas is a widely used open source statistical analysis package. It's got a very rich ecosystem of visualizations of other libraries like scikit-learn that you can do statistical machine learning on that data. You can really play with that data in just a super cool, awesome way with pandas. And what we've shown here is I just pull that data out as a data frame. This is a pandas object. So this is a pandas utility that says just show the first 5 rows of the data frame. And you can see the data right there. You got the metric data. First column are timestamps. You can see there's a hierarchy of column headers that naturally tell you what the levels of the hierarchy are. You've got a project, zone, group, etc. And then you can do lots of cool things with the data frame. Now, I don't have the time to get into all the different things you can do, but I just want to give you a flavor of the kind of data that you can manipulate. Over here, I'm just applying a filter which takes a regular expression on all the column headers, and it just finds anything any column that matches Europe West 1B, and it's just showing me the data for that. I can aggregate data by project ID and zone by just giving the different levels, by using mean as my aggregation function, and then doing a group by, and I'm just showing the first 5 rows of that data frame, and so on and so forth. So before I wind up, when we were doing the demo at the keynote, right in the middle of the demo, Dan was standing over in the corner, and he toggled the load so that the load shifted from AWS resources to GCP resources. And just out of curiosity, I decided to hack this up before I got here to see whether we can actually see the Apache request count metric for the last 2 hours, and I'm doing a downsampling by 5 minutes, if I can actually see that load shift as a heat map. So I have no idea what I'm going to see, but let's check it out. Oh, I just caught the load shift right here. I could have widened the hours to 3, and you would have seen this. But what this is showing is the top 2 instances apparently were not involved in the load toggling. I think they were backup instances. But then you see earlier in the time there was a shift from load from the AWS resource to the GCP resources. OK, so to recap, what we've shown you here is a way to directly tap into the underlying data in Stackdriver with an ad hoc interface in the situation where the super awesome Stackdriver interface is not adequate. With that, let me hand the control back to Dan.
Thank you very much, Voss. All right, so to wrap it up, first of all, we want to thank you for your time. It was a pleasure to tell you about the new Google Stackdriver. We hit on a few key themes. So the first thing I'll recap is we try to make it really easy for you to get the visibility that you need, whether it's at the cloud platform layer, the system layer, or the application layer. Right? Next, we talked about integrations, be it the monitoring integration with our agent or our logging agent, FluentD, or third-party notification tools like PagerDuty and Slack and Campfire and HipChat, and also these new and exciting integrations with other tools within the Google Cloud Platform. The Bigquery logging integration was launched last year to great applause. Many of you are using it actively. The Data Lab integration will be available for you very shortly, and we're really excited about that on the time series front. We talked about insights. Now, what we think about and sort of obsess over is how can we support an operator or a developer on call going from that PagerDuty alert or that SMS to go all the way through whatever signals they need to get through to get to root cause. We showed the initial stages of that in terms of integrating monitoring and logging. You could also see integration between monitoring and tracing and error reporting. And so we intend to go further and further in terms of bringing these tools and capabilities together. And then finally, we talked about cloud platform and how we embrace Google Cloud, AWS, and we intend to support additional platforms as you tell us that you want us to. And so thank you very much for your time. You can try Google Stackdriver free in beta right now. And if you have any questions, we'll be at the infrastructure and operations booth out on the floor. Thank you.